Welcome to the series Employee Health Services, Mind, Body, and Spirit. Employee Health is a section in the City of Albuquerque's Risk Management Division. Its mission is to promote a sense of community and increase wellness among city employees and their families by providing education and counseling about physical and mental health. And now, Mind, Body, and Spirit with Dr. Julia Bain.
Hello, this is Dr. Julia Bain, and welcome to Mind, Body, and Spirit. Today I have a very special guest, the Executive Director of the Children's Grief Center of New Mexico, Jade.bock. Welcome to the program, Jade.
Julia, thank you so much.
I'm so glad you could come.
Me too.
Like I told you, I didn't even know that this agency existed, and I'm so excited that you're here to tell everybody in the community what the Children's Grief Center is, what it's about, how can you get your child involved, how can you become involved as an adult. So let's just get started with, how did this whole agency begin? Who started it and when did it start? Where is it? Give us the scoop.
We were founded in 2000 by a group of community members, people just like you and me, who had all experienced a significant death in their family, and they had young people in their family, and they needed resources. They needed more help. One of our founders was a local psychologist whose 16-year-old son was killed in a pole vaulting accident at a local high school. And even though she was this, incredibly experienced and accredited mental health professional, in coping with her own grief, it was such a struggle to try and explain things and help her younger child. Another one of our founders were a couple that one was an attorney, one was an educator, very well connected, lots of community support, and they lost their teenage son very suddenly. He actually died of leukemia under unusual circumstances. He died the day he was diagnosed. And it's even though they had this wonderful support network and a lot of loving family, they found that they really needed more. And at the time, they lived in Arlington, Texas. And Arlington, Texas is the home of the Warm Place. The Warm Place is one of about 300 Children's Grief Center programs around the country. Now, when this couple relocated to Albuquerque some years later and they connected with other families that understood the pain of loss and were really searching for answers for their kids, they were able to say, there's a model out there. There's a way to do this. And this group came together and they did research and they raised some money, and they brought the executive director of the Dougie Center, which is the very first Children's Grief Center program, founded in 1982, in Portland, Oregon. They flew her out here to train the first group of volunteers and to talk to the founding board of directors about how you create a children's grief center. So this group worked for a year to make this happen, and in 2001 the very first services were offered.
That's a wonderful beginning, because whether you're 2 years old or 102 years old, whether it's sudden or you lay in bed dying for years, death is brutal.
Yeah.
Death is brutal. And, when we're young, we don't have the capacity to wrap our minds around, this is a natural part of life, certainly.
Yeah.
Maybe you could talk about your mission as an agency in terms of helping kids be able to go to that place of acceptance.
Our mission is to provide young people a safe and supportive environment where they can share feelings and experiences around a death. And we do that with peer support groups. So it's not a mental health service. I think one of our underlying philosophies is that just because we were going about our lives and then somebody important to us died doesn't necessarily mean that we suddenly developed a mental health condition that requires treatment and diagnoses. What we do at the Children's Grief Center is we bring together young people of a similar age and with similar circumstances where they can just share their stories with each other. Some of the kids are the leaders, are the veterans. They've been coming to group for 6 or 12 months and they get it, and they're able to reach a helping hand back to the newer kids who maybe just lost their mother or father 6 or 8 weeks ago and are struggling in this fog of confusion. So it really is peer support. Now, the peer support is facilitated by specially trained volunteers. These are the most compassionate and wonderful people I have ever met.
So anybody can volunteer. Anybody watching this show could volunteer.
Anybody over the age of 21
Okay.
who completes our training, it's a rigorous training, who can commit to a year of service and pass a background check, a reference check, and all that jazz.
Good.
And all the details about how you become a volunteer are on our website. We provide 2 trainings per year, one in August and one in January.
Okay.
And we've been doing this for years. And one of the things that we learned very early on is that there's just not a lot of information out there in our world about how to talk to kids when someone dies.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that we do is we open up our training not just to volunteers at the Children's Grief Center, but to professionals who might be working with the bereaved and bereaved families. And our training is actually accredited with CEUs for psychologists and social workers and counselors, and these folks can come to our training and get the CEUs and learn about our philosophy and our approach and you know, how our work is based, and then they can go back and use that information in their own clinical setting.
Very good. Very good. So, you know, death is a sucker punch.
Yeah.
Boom! And especially when you're young, and especially if it's the first time that somebody you adore dies, I think it's great the structure of your program where you utilize people and other children and adults who have lived it. You know, I've lived through this horror. I get it, and I'm going to support you. I'm not a LPCC. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a psychiatrist. I am someone who has survived this, and you can too. Is that pretty much how you roll in your groups?
You know, you nailed it. You know, that's exactly it. Years ago, I heard this story from another grief center. Our facilitators all introduce themselves just like the kids do at the beginning of group. We go around in a circle and we say our name, our age, who died and how they died. Now that might be the only time all night that one of our volunteer facilitators mentions that someone may have died in their lives. And just like you said, most people are attracted to this work because they get it at a heart level and they've lived through it, but not everybody. It's not a requirement to be a volunteer there. However, in this particular group night at this particular grief center, this group of kids is going around in a circle and introducing themselves, their name, their age, and who died and how they died. And one of the volunteers comes in and he sits down and he says, well, my name is Bob and I'm 52 years old and my mom died when I was 12 of cancer. And then it goes on to the next person and that kid says to his friend, man, he's been coming here for a long time. So the kids, they really relate to the grown-ups in the group, the facilitators, as people who have been through it.
Yeah,
and the
that's funny.
facilitators, you know, we do not counsel, we do not advise. They're really there to keep everybody physically and emotionally safe, and the kids do the hard work in group.
Let's say your child is in the group, or you have a child in the group, and their suffering seems so profound, or maybe they've even described some thoughts of self-harm. What do you do then?
You know, sometimes that happens, but not a whole lot. And our facilitators are trained to recognize when an issue with a child or a family is beyond the scope of our services and to say, now's the time for us to get extra help. Okay. And, you know, they'll talk to a staff person, they'll talk to one of our resource coordinators who is a volunteer who's present on every group night and is really just there to solve problems and refer people to a more appropriate service that they can access in addition to the Children's Grief Center. You know, some families, you know, might need help with paying utility bills. The number one loss that we see at the center is the death of a father. And finances are uncertain after a death. These families are struggling not just with the death itself, but losing that paycheck, paying for a funeral out of the blue, possibly losing their home that they lived in because they can't afford it anymore, or not wanting to live in that home anymore because dad died of a heart attack on the kitchen floor and they can't walk in there without thinking about it. You know, so there's a lot of change and secondary losses is what we call them, that go beyond the earth-shattering event of the death itself. And we can offer referrals to resources to assist with those secondary losses that are beyond what we do at the Children's Grief Center. And that might include some one-on-one counseling with somebody who has a lot of experience in trauma and helping to mitigate that experience of trauma so it doesn't become embedded in the child's life and impact them for the rest of their lives.
Right. Right. Well, that's good. How do people get to you? Kind of someone watching the show pick up the phone and call you?
Yeah.
Do you get
Just call
referrals
us.
from physicians, clinicians? How do people get?
You know, usually our number one source of referrals is school counselors. You know, they're there in the schools, and it's generally not because somebody came to them and said, little Jimmy's mom died of breast cancer last week. How our kids come to the attention of school counselors is because there was a dramatic change in their behavior. And the teacher noticed, little Jimmy's not coming out from under his desk. Little Jimmy has stopped talking. Little Jimmy is starting fights. Or, you know, little Becky has gone from kind of an average student, you know, with some, real interest in her social life to not speaking to her friends anymore and being driven to get straight A's and be perfect at all times because little Becky might think, if I'm perfect, maybe nothing bad will happen to my mom. And that's how these kids get to the attention of their school counselors. And then they dig a little bit and they find out, you know, that they've had some death in the family. And then they say, hey, there's this place called the Children's Grief Center. It's completely free. Why don't you give them a call?
Completely free.
Completely free. And we're able to be completely free. First of all, it's one of our goals to always be completely free for bereaved families because, you know, if you lose a parent and you're struggling with all those other losses in your life that I described, your finances are up in the air. You may not be able to pay for a service. You may have lost the one parent who was carrying the health insurance program, and counseling isn't even an option. Yeah. So my job as executive director is to remove barriers to service. I need to make it as easy as possible for our families to come to us. And one way that we do that is to provide these services at no charge. We're able to do that with the help of our 100 volunteers who are just totally amazing people. And also with the contributions, private donations from the community and from private foundations. But the Children's Grief Center is just this small, little local 501c3. We don't receive any public funding. We don't receive any county, state, or federal dollars. And and we just do this all.
What about United Way?
Yes, United Way, we always apply for their community fund grants, and we often get them. And a lot of individuals will designate the Children's Grief Center through their United Way giving program.
But you do accept donations via credit card, check, over the phone?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, great. Let's go ahead and get a phone number up.
Sure.
How do people reach you?
505, because of course we're in Albuquerque, and 323-0478.
323-0478.
If you can't remember that, you can Google Children's Grief. And our website is childrensgrief.org. Children's Grief Center of New Mexico is the whole name of our organization. And there's, just like reducing barriers to services, I want to reduce barriers to people who want to get involved. So we try to make it easy for people to contribute and to volunteer and to contact us with, you know, other things that we might be able to do that would be appropriate for our mission to serve the community.
Excellent. How many children do you serve every year?
You know, it varies. It's usually over 500.
That's a lot of kids.
It is, and most kids come to us for a long time. I mean, these are support groups, and they're making friends in the groups, and they're exploring their experience in group.
A long time. Does that mean year or years?
8 to 12 months is the average. Some people come for longer. One thing that we know is that as kids mature and develop, they understand their loss in different ways. You know, a 6-year-old girl who loses her mom is going to be struggling in that way for a while. And they might come to the Grief Center for a bit, and then they'll close from the Grief Center, and everything's all well and good. And then she's 12, and she's missing her mom in different ways, and wishing that she had that person to, you know, guide her through adolescence. And
so she can come back.
she can absolutely come back, and they often do.
So she can attend a group with other children and or one-on-one with one of your volunteers, or is it all mostly group?
It's just group.
Okay.
You know, we find that being with peers is really the most healing thing that we can offer, and that's the thing that we offer that's different.
You have a huge campus. Talk about how big you are and where you are.
We're so blessed and lucky. Our campus is near the Nature Center. We're sort of centrally
wonderful is that?
located. Yeah, we're kind of near Rio Grande and Candelaria. And we're actually co-located with a couple other nonprofits. Now, our organization is really tiny during the day when we're just a few adults answering phones, but at night we're huge. We're huge. You know, we'll have 80 kids there, and we need a dining hall, and we need 10 different group rooms for everybody to be in their own group at the same time. So we have littles who are ages 5, 6, and 7, and they're struggling with things like, what is the difference between alive and dead? And then we have middles, and they're 8, 9, and 10, and they're struggling with the gory details. You know, I really just need to understand what happened to my mother's body in that car accident. I just don't understand. And then we have tweens, and they're struggling with a foot in both worlds and trying to fit in at school, and maybe they don't want people to know, maybe they do want people to know. And then we have teenagers, and that's a whole different beast, and they're in their own group. And we also do groups for young adults, so people who are in college, people who are out of the house, and they might lose a parent or a sibling or a partner and be struggling with that loss. And so we have groups for them too. So we have this huge campus. It's 3.5 acres. We have a 5,000 square foot group building. We have playgrounds. We have big grassy field, you know, and that's where we're able to bring together these wonderful volunteers and these wonderful families where they really just support each other. It's not magic. It's not expensive.
It is magic.
Well, it's magical. I'll say it's magical, but it's really very simple. It's really just finding a place where you feel like this is my tribe.
It also feels to me very spiritual. People sharing their heart, people sharing their truth and being authentic and genuine. And to me, that's spirituality. And does that come up?
Oh, spirituality is a huge part of loss, you know, and with kids, when we talk about, you know, what's going on with you and how are you impacted by the death in these different ways, they often talk about, I'm angry at God, or I don't understand why God needed another angel and it had to be my mom, you know. I mean, these are, you know, our program does not espouse any particular spiritual path at all, but spirituality and challenges to our spirituality, expansions of our spirituality are part of the grief process and that journey that we all go through. So it definitely comes up. And we can talk about it in our group in a safe and supportive way. But, you know, there are things that can come out of the grief journey that change your life forever. Forever. And, you know, part of that is perhaps a changed sense of priorities and a deeper understanding of how this whole universe might fit together. And we hear lots of beautiful stories of people who have, they feel like they can still find connection with their person who's gone. And then we hear lots of heartbreaking stories from people who are like, they're just gone and that's just it. And I have to come to terms with that. It's all accepted. It's all okay. But it's definitely a part of every conversation. From 5-year-olds to 50-year-olds, we're all kind of struggling with the same thing.
Wow. That's beautiful.
It's pretty cool.
Speaking of stories, could you share a story of somebody in particular that you think the audience would maybe be able to relate to the story or have compassion for the person?
I do want to tell a story about this little boy who's not a little boy anymore. And you can actually see him on some of the videos that are on our website and on our YouTube channel. And maybe you can pick out which boy I'm talking about. I'm not going to say his name. He came to us when he was 11 years old. His mom had died. She'd been sick. And it was kind of confusing about how sick she was. You know, the doctors thought she would live for quite some time with her illness, but she actually died after 3 weeks.
Oh.
And his father was devastated, and this little boy was devastated, and it was just the two of them. They were left on their own. And they found the grief center, came to the grief center for a long time. He was this quiet little guy, kind of shy, didn't talk a whole lot. It was hard to kind of know what was going on, you know, what was he getting out of this, you know, and then over time he kind of opened up, and he and his dad, you could see changes in them, you know, they were standing taller, they were laughing during a dinner, because dinner is part of our service. We provide a meal for families before they go into group.
How wonderful.
So everybody can break bread together and just have a time to transition from the chaos of their day into this support group.
And let me interrupt really quickly. Does the little boy have his own group and the father has
Absolutely.
his own group? Or are they in the same group?
No.
Okay.
No, every family member is in their own group.
Okay.
You know,
Okay.
if there's a set of 4 siblings, they're each going to be in their own group.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, no, everybody gets their own group.
Okay.
Absolutely. But so they came for a while, and they got what they needed, and they decided to close from group, and we loved these guys, and we were sad to see them go, but they left. So then fast forward to years later, this little guy is in college. And this corresponds with the year that we started our Camp Cortisone program. And his dad got in touch with us and said, you know what, my son's coming back for the summer back to Albuquerque from college, and he wants to get involved in the Grief Center. Is there anything he can do? Well, guess what? He can volunteer at camp. And he came to camp, and he has been at every single camp ever since then. In fact, we now schedule our camps around his schedule when he's available, because this guy opens up our camp night. When our kids come together for their summer camp experience, we do icebreakers, and we have dinner, and we get to know each other, and we're silly, but then we get real serious, and this kid is part of that getting serious. And we all sit down in a giant group, 50 of us, 50 kids, 30 volunteers, and this guy shares his story. He says, this is where I was, and this is what happened, and this is how I found out, and this is what it was like to go back to school, and all the things that kids would say, and this is what it was like to go to the Grief Center. This is what it was like to talk to people who understood, as compared to talking to people who didn't understand. And this is what it was like when I felt like I could step away from that, and I could go on. And this is what it's like now that I'm an adult, and how the loss of my mother still kind of tugs at my heart some days and sometimes, and how most days I'm okay, but I'm always going to miss her. And then, when he's done telling his story, and I tell you, every boy in that room is just transfixed by this guy. And the girls too. But for boys to hear someone share their story with such sensitivity, they don't get that anywhere else,
A role model.
Yeah, exactly. And so then everybody breaks up into their own little groups, and everybody tells their story just the way this guy did, in the same level of detail, and everyone listens. And that's how we start our camp program.
So you have your camp once a year? And
At least once a year.
And that's a great story. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, and it's
How many nights does it last?
Camp is generally 3 days and 2 nights.
Okay.
There's always current information on our website about where it's going to be, when it's going to be, because that changes. We try to hold camp in different parts of the state, because our camp outreach is our effort to provide bereavement support to kids who can't come into the Grief Center in Albuquerque. There's no programs like this in Clovis or Tucumcari or Las Cruces. So, and we can't get there, and the kids can't get to us.
So they come to camp from all over the state?
All over the state. The camp is for everybody.
How wonderful is that?
I think it's pretty fun, and it is super wonderful. And I tell you, no kid ever wants to go to grief camp, right? I mean, we've had kids lock themselves in gas station bathrooms. We've had kids lock themselves in cars in the parking lot. Nobody thinks grief camp's a good idea, right? They're like, this is a bad one, Mom. I don't want to do this.
That's the last thing I want to do.
No, why do I want to go to camp to talk about my dad's death? That's horrible.
Yeah.
But we do, of course, pre-camp evaluations. We do post-camp evaluations, so we can measure the effectiveness of our services, and we can learn from that. Post-camp evaluations almost universally say, when we ask them, what would you change about camp? They say, I just wish camp was longer.
Isn't that great? It really helps, doesn't it?
I think it helps everybody who's involved, not just the kids, but the volunteers. It helps the staff. I think that we're all blessed and lucky. We have a staff of 6, that we get to work in this environment and provide this service every day. I have been with the Grief Center since 2003. I started as a volunteer. I've been an employee since 2005. And every one of those years, when I look back on it, has just been a profound blessing to me. And I feel like what the volunteers say all the time, I definitely feel it, that you always get back more than you give, and it's an honor to be a part of it.
Let's say what your website is again, in case somebody wants to learn more about what your services or donate online.
Yeah, sure, donate.
Okay.
We're the Children's Grief Center of New Mexico. Our website is childrensgrief.org.
Okay.
But if you Google anything like that, Children's Grief, New Mexico Grief, Kids in Grief, we should come up.
Okay.
Every school counselor should know about us. And if anybody watching this program comes across someone who doesn't know about us, please let me know so we can give them the information they need to refer families to us.
Perfect. Perfect. Let me check my questions, make sure I'm not missing something that's extremely important that we haven't already talked about. What advice do you have for the audience and me around death as a natural part of life? Because, you know, I consider myself very strong, but I don't like death. Never have, never will.
I've never met someone who does.
But you know, if you could, any words of wisdom around, you know, I know acceptance is like, that's the core.
Sure.
Acceptance. This is going to happen. It did happen, and it's going to happen again. Acceptance, acceptance. And, you know, Grandma taught me that. But, I mean, what can you tell us just to help us, you know, when we think about death?
You know, one of our tenets when we train volunteers is that we're not allowed to give advice. So this is kind of a tough question to answer. So I'll give some general stuff. And one thing that I did a few years ago with the help of Dr. Craig Pierce, who's an amazing individual here in town.
You co-wrote a book with him.
I did. It's called,
we have an author.
Yeah, it's called Parenting Through Grief. And that really is my best advice. And we give copies away for free at the Grief Center, and
Excellent.
People can order it on Amazon or on our website if they want to pay for it. But generally, I like to quote Fred Rogers. You remember Mr. Rogers?
Of course.
He partially raised me. I love him.
Oh, yeah.
You know, from the living room floor.
He's a saint. He's a saint.
And Mr. Rogers says, if it's mentionable, it's manageable. And I think where a lot of us as adults get caught up is thinking, we can't tell kids the truth. We can't tell them what really happened because it's going to hurt them. It's going to wound them. It's going to make it harder for them. That's not actually true. What wounds them is knowing that something's wrong in the family and people aren't talking to them about it. And they tend to fill in the blanks.
The elephant in the room.
Right, and they'll fill in the blanks with their own story, which is way worse than the one that really is going on, I assure you. I've heard kids say things like, if I'd just gotten better grades, my dad wouldn't have had that heart attack. You know, they take on such ownership of everything that went wrong. So at the Grief Center, we give families the opportunity to practice talking about it, to practice mentioning it, to practice telling your story, and finding that even though it might hurt a little bit, and I might even be crying, that the world didn't end, and that's okay. And the more we tell our story, the less it hurts. It dissipates over time. But we need to be able to talk about it within our family, and that leadership comes from the adults in the family.
Yes.
And I know that we're not given instruction on how to do this anywhere in our lives. So people can call the Grief Center and we'll talk about how to have those conversations with your kids. But if it's mentionable, it's manageable.
I love that expression.
And if we screw it up, guess what? We always get a chance to do it again. All right? Kids will, you never just have a conversation once with kids, right?
Right.
No, 6 months later, they'll have different questions. Or 6 minutes later, they'll come back to you and they'll be like, wait a minute, about that thing. You know, so you always get a chance to revisit it, and you can always say, you know, I don't have all the answers, but maybe we can figure it out together. It's okay to look for extra help. It's okay to not know everything. It's okay to hurt. Sometimes parents are so afraid to cry in front of their kids, they'd rather be angry. It's more appropriate for me to be angry than to show the weakness that we think tears are. I think that's a bunch of crap. I think that the real strength is in being able to be vulnerable, to be able to cry, to sit down with your kids and cry and say, this is horrible and this is terrible, and then to get up and make dinner, because that's what we do. We have to find a way to go on.
You are awesome. You're a rock star.
The Grief Center's awesome.
We have 1 minute. Go ahead and tell us your phone number
Sure.
again.
Yeah. So it's the Children's Grief Center of New Mexico. You can call us, email us, whatever. Our phone number is 505-323-0610. 0478. We do support groups for young people in the evenings in Albuquerque and in Rio Rancho. We do all kinds of other programs around the state for kids who can't get to us, and we do psychosocial education for people working with kids who might need to learn more about how to support them when they're grieving, especially students. Teachers and schools and school superintendents need to call us when something goes wrong in their school, and we'll help them out.
Jade Richardson-Bock, you are a rock star in addition to the executive director of the Children's Grief Center. Thank you so much for coming on my program.
Thanks for having me.
And for the work you do in our community. And thank you all for watching. This is Dr. Julia Bain. Until next time, be happy and be well.
This has been Employee Health Services Mind, Body, and Spirit. For more information, call the City of Albuquerque's Employee Health Services at 768-4613. Let the Employee Health Services staff let you be your best at work, at home, and at play.